Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Gordon Chang, my colleague and co-host, is here because we're going immediately to China. There is news from China. The larger story here, China's large enough, but the larger story here is over these last weeks, between the end of 2013 and the beginning of 2014, increasingly we're seeing in reports by prominent speakers about the global economy. George Soros comes to mind. The concern moved to conventional wisdom that the China miracle these last 20, 25 years, at least since Tiananmen, has hit a wall. There are a lot of metaphors here, has fallen down the stairs, has been interrupted by a decline, or has come up against the limits of a dictatorial regime. The Maoists turned into the capitalists, turned into the oligarchs, turned into the billionaires, and that Xi Jinping is leading what appears to be the last days of the Chinese Communist Party's success, that we're moving into a period of disruption or decline. Good evening to you, Gordon.
Good evening, John. And the news from New York is that Gordon can sit here today with you because it is Lydia's birthday, and she allowed me to come here.
Lydia, I apologize. I'm glad we got that mention in. Before we celebrate the birthday, Gordon, we have to be very focused now on this story of the possible decline in China. Is that fair? Possible decline.
Well, it certainly is, John, because we're looking at numbers from China in the fourth quarter of last year, and especially December, and people are starting to notice that the economy is trending down. Now, this has been occurring for quite some time. The numbers, I think, are starting to show, as you said, the limits of what China can do within its existing system.
We're very pleased to welcome our colleague from China right now in Beijing. This is Anne Stevenson Yang, who's co-founder of J Capital Research. And more importantly right now, she's the author of a new book that I look forward to reading. It's available on Kindle edition, and Anne and I will speak at length of it soon enough, and I apologize for not having read it, Anne, but China Alone: The Emergence from and Potential Return to Isolation. And I seize on that last word in your title. That sounds dire. An isolated China is a China not only in decline, but a China in turmoil, in anarchic collapse. We saw that with the dynasty during the Middle Ages, Gordon, when it cut itself off from the world.
Yeah, and what we're seeing right now is political turmoil in Beijing, an economy which is faltering, and the authority of the central government is eroding. All these things are occurring at the same time, John.
And good morning to you in Beijing. I start with a statistic we get from Bloomberg, breaking news within these last moments, that the producer price index in China has fallen 1.4% from a year ago, the 22nd straight drop. Interpret that statistic, Anne. What does that say about the deceleration in China's economy? Good morning to you.
Good morning, John. And what that says, the producer price index has been declining for about almost 2 years now, steadily, and it has more to do with the credit glut than with anything else, because what you have is a dynamic where you have vast overcapacity in industry, and yet companies that are losing money with every ton they produce are given more credit to produce more in order to maintain the GDP target. So you have steel companies, for example, that lose money on every single ton of steel, cement companies that lose money on every ton of cement, and yet they get credit to produce it. So that drives down prices because you have excess product.
And essentially, this is unsustainable because you have, all these new production facilities. They're bright, they're gleaming, they're building of them. It creates gross domestic product. But when they build them, they've now got all of this debt. And you've pointed out something which is really fascinating, and that is credit in China is increasing by 20 to 30% a year. That's just completely unbelievable.
It is, Gordon, and it's created this dynamic where the Chinese economy is like a crack addict, becoming more and more emaciated and more dependent on the fixes of crack. So a year ago in Q1, we had credit increase by 60% year on year. So now you're faced with a situation where either you increase credit by another 80% in order to pay back the old credit and accelerate, or else you go into decline. so the government every year is faced between this, it's between this rock and hard place. Do we just keep glutting the economy with more credit or not? And it's not only that it's unsustainable. I think what to focus on is the consequences of doing this, where you suck the life out of the rest of the economy and you turn everybody's disposable income to paying for debt rather than buying stuff. That's why consumer spending has been declining.
An interesting statistic that in 2007, every new dollar of credit in China produced 83 cents of gross domestic product. That number was down to 17 cents at the beginning of last year, and I suspect we're at a dime now. And when you talk about credit creation and you talk about declining output, it's arithmetic that at some point there's got to be a large debt crisis.
Detail, Gordon. I think what I understand and saying is that the reason the credit continues to increase in China, they keep creating debt, is that they're paying off old debts. So who are they fooling? You can't pay off bad debt with new debt because it quickly becomes bad debt.
Yes, and Anne has done the pioneering work on this. So this is fascinating because she has actually gone to banks all over China. She's gone to shadow banks, trust companies, and she has detailed how this has occurred. And it's absolutely fascinating.
And because you see this, and because the numbers now support this decline, and George Soros says there's a decline, is the opinion in China that they need to change? This so-called word reform was recently thrown around. Have they accepted it?
I don't. I think that what happens is that when you have very sparse information about a political process and you don't have a mature political dialogue, and everybody starts to analyze politics in a very sort of simplistic way. So to hear around China is, oh, well, they have to do this or else there will be social unrest. They have to do that or else there will be social unrest. The inverse of that is, oh, the brilliant, masterful leaders, all they have to do is understand the problem and then they can change. Well, you can't change a massive political economic system because you understand the problem. Think about the United States. Just because Barack Obama understands that we need health care, can we change our health care expenditure? Of course not. And we're a far more well-developed and well-functioning political system than China is. So people may think that China needs to change its banking system, but the banking system is absolutely integral to the political process and the economy and can't be changed.
And we just got a few moments left. When do you think the crisis will hit in China? Will it be this year, next year? I know nobody knows, but what's your gut feeling?
It's really, they have strung it along for a really long time, and I was predicting a crisis for the second half of 2012. I was obviously wrong, but right now I have to say I don't see how this can continue past 2014. I feel that the property market is already crashing, and the banking system is bound to come up to another seizure.
And because we're isolating China, and the word isolation in your book says China's isolating itself. We saw in the crash of 2008 here that when the housing bubble burst, it took down the American economy, and we have reason to believe that it was integrated into taking down European economies, all economies. Is that true for China? Is it integrated enough so that its decline will pull us all down?
It's very hard to predict. Nobody predicted what would happen when China rose and how quickly it would assume share of international markets and how quickly it would take out old manufacturers from the U.S. and Europe. Nobody is predicting now what will happen when China declines, and I think it will be very surprising and quite sudden. That said, I don't think that China has internally integrated much with the international system. Instead, it uses international legal tools selectively rather than really changing.
Anne Stevenson Yang, she is the author of the new China Alone, The Emergence from and Potential Return to Isolation. That's not a good word when it comes to the Middle Kingdom. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com. I'm John Batchelor.